Welcome to What is Going Om, for new thought from the edge of Om. Each week on OMTimes' flagship radio show, veteran broadcaster, author, and media consultant Sandie Sedgbeer conducts thought-provoking interviews with inspirational authors, artists, musicians, scientists, speakers, and filmmakers who are working at the point where spirituality and science meet consciousness at the very edge of Om. Here is your host, Sandie Sedgbeer.
Hello. Mark Nepo is a poet and a philosopher who's taught in the fields of poetry and spirituality for over 40 years. A New York Times bestselling author, his numerous award-winning books, including The Book of Awakening, More Together Than Alone, and Drinking from the River of Light, have been translated into over 20 languages. As several times guest on Oprah Winfrey's Supersoul Sunday program and the recipient of a Life Achievement Award from Age Nation, he was named one of 2016's 100 most spiritually influential living people by Watkins Mind Body Spirit, and he was also chosen as one of the OWN Network's Supersoul 100, a group of inspired leaders using their gifts and voices to elevate humanity. Mark Nepo joins me today to discuss his latest and undoubtedly most timely book, Surviving Storms, Finding the Strength to Meet Adversity, in which he covers where we are, how we got here, and more importantly, how we can meet these challenges by deepening our roots and solidifying our connection to all spirit and life. Mark Nepo, welcome.
Oh, thank you, Sandie. It's wonderful to be with you again.
You too, Mark. In your book, Surviving Storms, you state that every generation has faced times of turbulence and chaos, and all the traditions offer practices and resources to help us meet the challenges of our day. But the storms we face today and the fault lines we endure as a society, as you term it, they're not the same as what previous generations have faced. You know, today we've got many, many more storms all converging together at once, haven't we?
Yes, we do. At once it's a paradox, because at once what we're facing is complex and unique, and yet every generation is faced. It's our turn. Will we choose love over fear or not? How will we show up? What will, great love and great suffering have always been the great teachers, and they will reduce us to the core sameness, the wonderful chord in our heart that we share. But we do live in a particularly strange time, over the weekend here in the States, there was yet another mass shooting. And, it's as if we have, when I look at this, in the book, there's an effort, I make an effort to try to understand how we are where we are today. And there seems to be a convergence of a lot of dissociating factors that we've almost bred a generation that has lost its direct connection to life. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And without that reverence, we don't know what's real and what's not, anymore. I think one of the strangest things was, in the States, when there was the insurrection at the Capitol, and I remember seeing that live. And not only was it horrifying because of how brutal people were being to each other, but there was this strange dissociation. They were taking pictures of themselves and as if they were in a video game. Mm-hmm. And and when I look at all of the trying to understand this epidemic of mass shootings, and then what comes to me is the image of an aneurysm in the body. An aneurysm is a weak cell that when the body is under pressure, it explodes. And that usually leads to a stroke or something very significant in a physical body. And I think that, while every one of these individuals is responsible for their own actions, of course, I think that they are social aneurysms. I think they are weak cells in the social body and the responsibility we all bear. You know, it's easy to look at this evil, craziness and go, what's wrong with these people? It has nothing to do with me. But I need to say, and in America especially, there is an epidemic of these shootings. So the question is, how have we pressurized society that we have such an epidemic of weak cells exploding? How can we depressurize society? How can we refine our equilibrium and love each other forward?
Mm. Mm. Many people are asking the same question, and in your book, Surviving Storms, you lay out a really good explanation of how we got here, you know, from the Industrial Revolution on. And we all know that technology is creating so much division and separation and isolation, and it's affecting our brains as well. It's affecting our ability to sit and be with information, because as soon as we've digested one piece, there's another and another and another. And, you know, this unique kind of confluence, I think, you say there's a madness eating our society from the inside out. And I think this confluence of progress, as we think of it, you know, is adding to that. So tell us a little bit about, you know, what you share in the book about what happens as society gets more complex.
Well, this confluence, and we can go back to the Industrial Revolution, and it's very interesting because one of the great insights about progress, modern progress, comes from Karl Marx. And we often, because of communism, we tend to throw Marx out of the picture. And, you know, and the fascinating thing is Marx didn't create Marxism. You know, he had some insights about how society works that are still very useful. And this was one of them. He saw in 1844, as the Industrial Revolution began, that the relationships that life was centered around, mostly farming, you know, so that people live together, work together. The center of life was the farm, and the fire in place in the center of the home. And then when mechanized society started having people leave to go to work and then come home, and their work started to be a division of labor, and so now people are only working on parts. Marx foresaw that when people will be divided from their true basic nature, if enough citizens become divided and separate, they will form an alien nation. And he was the one who coined the term alienation, which is a social loneliness or estrangement. And in fact, he foresaw the first generation of therapists as alienists, as those who would restore people to their true, whole, basic nature. He didn't say do away with progress. He said let's repair the cost of progress. And I think that's very relevant today. I think one of the things that, as we were mentioning, that is so much of our struggle is so many people have been separated from their direct connection in life and from life. And so there's a loss of reverence of what life is. You know, media, everything can be so, you know, we can cut and paste and record and play back, but every moment is unrepeatable. Every moment, you know, I remember back in 2001 when the Twin Towers came down, and seeing that live and how horrific that was. And then, of course, with 24/7 news, we saw that same scene hundreds of times. Now, the value of the technology today is that 100 different people can see it once, not for you and me to see it 100 times. And so one of the ways that we have to stay current and connected to life is that when I feel the one time in my heart, I have to not look again. I have to not become hypnotized,
Yes.
because I think also a modern struggle is that, in nature and spiritually, things are always coming together and falling apart. But when things come together, they're very quiet. But when things fall apart, they naturally make a lot of noise. And we in the modern age have become addicted to the noise of things falling apart. So it's not that we need a good news station, we need a whole news station so we can feel the balance of life, not turning from a good to bad or bad to good, but seeing the totality of life. Because in this greater diversity, we talk rightfully in our age about ethnic diversity and racial diversity. And that's built on a spiritual diversity, that what makes life so resilient and such a resource is its diversity, which means letting all things in.
Mm. Mm. You say that the difficulties we face today are part of a pattern in history. And if I may quote something you wrote, you said, "The long swells of history crest and crash century after century. The kindness and cruelty of an age expands and contracts. The openness and narrowness of how we learn either grows or collapses, depending on how each generation reacts to the storms they encounter and create." Well, clearly, everything has crashed in the world as we know it. And you say that we can learn through this, but if it's happening so often, I mean, it's cyclical. The wheel turns and turns and turns. We've been here before in different ways. We've never learned
Well,
because we're here again.
well, I hold it a little differently, and that is because I've come to think about uh, incarnation and progress. And so what I mean by progress is that in the daily world, we can benefit and leave the world a little better for those who come after us. So that means, say, an example is that an indigenous tribe, they migrate, they move, they look for a place to set roots and live, and let's say they land on a plateau, and there's an amazing epic view that just is reminiscent of eternity. They say, this is where we want to live. And all the adults of that generation clear all the trees. So when their children wake up, they just simply look out. So that's progress. The children don't have to clear the trees. The adults did, the previous generation. But incarnation is no one can open your eyes and look for you. No one can, and if you don't see once you open your eyes, what's the point of opening your eyes? And if you don't love once you open your heart, what's the point of loving? So incarnation is that every generation goes through these archetypal passages, no matter what technology we have or not. Every generation from primitive times to today has the same spiritual journey of how to be a spirit in a body and time on earth together. And so wisdom is not a shortcut, it's a resource. And so we haven't learned, and it's our turn to do it. And how will we do it in our turn? And so I've come to believe more in incarnation than progress, because I believe in the human heart. I believe in the spirit. And this is why, Mother Teresa talked about that courage is doing small things with love. And it can be paralyzing to try to think about all of this in such a global level, even though we have to. But then it's in the very gestures before us every day. How do we do this? How do we do this? So two things. One is there's a chapter in there, the purpose of goodness. And let me briefly share that, because I think it's so important about this. And this came to me by looking at the work of Neil deGrasse Tyson, the wonderful contemporary physicist, and he wrote a short book that is anything but a shortcut, called Astrophysics for People in a Hurry, with a tongue-in-cheek title. It's anything. It's a very serious primer, and in the beginning he shares his feeling, his guess of how the universe began, and what he talks about is that that before everything was formed, basically matter and antimatter were vying for their play. What's going to exist here? They were basically eating each other. And he says at the moment that there were 1,000,000,001 photons, positive energy, and just 1,000,000,000 hadrons, negative energy, just one more, boom, the universe came into being. And he suggests that if the Earth had settled in its orbit a little closer to the sun, all the water would have evaporated. There'd be no life. We wouldn't be talking. And likewise, if it settled a little farther away, it would all freeze and there'd be no life. So, I was so struck by, we're here by such a small gesture. And then as I was doing my errands one day, grocery store, the farm, I think I was in line getting a prescription at the pharmacy. And it occurred to me, this isn't a description of the moment of creation. This is a description of the ongoing creation of life. And every day, anonymously, life continues because there's one more photon than hadron, because there's one more kindness than cruelty, because there's one more awareness than unconsciousness. And so, and the humbling nobility of this, the purpose of goodness is, can we, through our incarnation, be the one gesture that keeps life going? Can we do that?
Well, that's a good question, because as you're saying that, I mean, at the same time, it's vice versa. One more incremental thing tips the scales the other way, and we are moving in a different direction, that we end up where we are now.
Well, and yet we're still here.
And we're still
Yeah,
here.
so not to deny how difficult things are, not to deny the cruelty and the disconnection that exists, but because we are addicted to the noise of things breaking apart, we have to look and listen harder.
Yes.
For the things coming together and for that one gesture. And so, we'll never know, if you go and you're in the parking lot at the grocery store and an old woman or man falls down and drops their groceries and you go over and help them up, you will never know if that is the one photon that keeps life going today. And still we have to do it, whether it is or not. So let me bring you, this is an ancient parable. Two monks are studying long and hard because they have been told that if they study hard enough, one day they can have an appointment with Buddha at the top of this mountain. So they study, and finally the day comes and they start out and they go up the mountain, and halfway up the mountain, one of them breaks his leg. So they spend the night. The other one takes care of him, intending to keep his appointment with Buddha the next day. But when they wake up, the one who broke his leg isn't doing so well. He has a fever, and it's clear it's not as simple as just leaving him. And the parable ends there and says, what would you do? And when we have more people in an age that will keep their appointment at the top of the mountain no matter what, we have an age that will engender cruelty. And when we have more people who will discover that tending their broken other is the summit, we have an age that engenders compassion. And we face this choice every day, every one of us. And it doesn't matter what you put on top of the mountain: God, security, wealth, safety, wisdom. And this raises the real notion that our gifts, at least in my life, our gifts tend to appear when we work with what we're given more than what we want. In fact, there's nothing wrong with working for what we want. It's wonderful to have goals and dreams. But often in my life, working for what I want has been an apprenticeship for working with what I've been given.
I'm glad you raised that, because I had flagged that. And I really would like you to share with us your wonderful metaphor, your explanation on 10,000 hands. Because I thought that was so beautiful.
No, thank you. Thank you. Well, and this is, again, comes from the humility of meeting what we're given and our limitations. And our limitations, which are nothing to dismiss or rationalize or minimize. There is a whole journey in accepting and grieving the losses we encounter. And we also are called to lean into what those limitations open. New ways of being, feeling, thinking. So the 10,000 hands is a metaphor. Yes, it's a chapter in the new book. That the heart has 10,000 hands. The part in us that is the spirit, that is infinite. We want everything. We want to dream everything. We want to go everywhere. We want to love 1,000 people. But we only have 2 hands. And that's the human in us. And so when we insist on wanting what the heart wants 10,000 hands, we will do harm. So just imagine, we're sitting, a group of us, and I want to bring you all tea, and I'm carrying 10 cups of tea. Well, inevitably, I will spill one and maybe burn you, or me, or both. But if I can bring the desire that comes from 10,000 hands into the 2 hands I have, and bring that 1 cup of tea to you, it is the cup of tea of a lifetime. And so we are often drawn in our humanness to go out of ourselves, like, oh, if I could love so many people, I could love everyone. Well, but I'm only one person, and I can't love everyone well. I can love one person well at a time. So when we go out, when we leave, that this is the trap of desire, is to take our 2 hands and say, but why can't I do more? Why can't I go here? Why can't I go there? Why can't? And it's wonderful to think about these things and even to do them when you can. But we start to put life other than where we are. It's over there if I could just get over there. It's in the one thing I haven't done yet. It's in the one person I haven't loved yet. And what life in our incarnation, and this is what embodiment is all about, is taking all of the possibility and putting it in our 2 hands in the one thing before us. And then we meet eternity. Then everything, then when I feel pain and your pain, now I am in the moment of everyone who ever felt pain. Then when I feel your kindness and love, then I am in the moment of everyone who ever loved. And it's through our authenticity and bringing the 10,000 hands into the 2 we have that we have this blessing of experiencing eternity through the smallest moments in our lives.
So when everything around us is reflecting back to us, all of these 10,000 things that we should be thinking about, wanting, pursuing more, how in that kind of an environment do we find what we need to step back and say, no, that's not what I want, because it's so hard not to get distracted by everything that's out there.
Well, I think one of the menacing assumptions, and this is more acute in our time than ever, it's been historical. One of the menacing assumptions is the assumption that life is other than where we are. And so one of whatever practice we choose, and whatever personal spiritual practice, whatever combination of gifts from all the traditions work for each of us, they all reinforce and reaffirm life is right where we are. God, whatever name you give to it, is right where we are. And so I really support a practice of return. Being human, we will be seduced by these things. But the work of self-awareness is to come back. How do we do that? Well, the first thing is through presence. Whenever I am distracted or confused or in pain or fearful, I try to give my full attention to the nearest thing. It could be the leaf on the tree outside my window. To give my full attention to the nearest bit of life until it becomes my teacher. Because in the Hindu tradition, there is a term upa guru, which means the teacher that is next to you at this moment. There's always a teacher next to us at this moment, if we can open our hearts and be there. And so this means, and this goes all the way back to the Book of Awakening, the subtitle of which is, to have the life you want by being present to the life you have. And that has been a great teacher to me, because just because I can speak these things, I'm not exempt from them, not exempt at all. And I think this is this is how we start bit by bit to restore our direct connection to life. Because once we restore that direct connection, then we re-feel how rare it is to be here. And then the reverence of life is in us again. And once the reverence of life is there, it is not so easy to do harm. I think one of the reasons we have so many people doing senseless harm is they have lost the reverence of life. They are actually, violence often is a last attempt to feel. Desperately last attempt to feel.
We're going to take a short break, Mark. I want to talk about presence a little more when we come back, because the one thing that is blatantly obvious to any of us who spend any time with our teens is that they don't know how to be present, because all of their attention is in their social media. But we'll get into that when we come back. You're listening to What Is Going On. I'm Sandie Sedgbeer, and my guest today is poet, philosopher, teacher, and award-winning author of 22 books that have been published in over 20 languages, Mark Nepo. And we're discussing his latest and most important book, Surviving Storms, Finding the Strength to Meet Adversity. We'll be back with more from Mark Nepo in a few moments.
OMTimes TV. Imagine becoming a super influencer. Reinvent yourself, invest in your brand, and then manifest your success with a robust spheric approach. OMTimes Media and Broadcasting offers a unique and multifaceted way to become the spiritual and conscious influencer you deserve to be by putting your message across our powerful platform with its proven record of integrity and excellence. Through our produced shows, OMTimes offers the opportunity to become a social media TV personality, a radio show host, an OMTimes magazine columnist, and a syndicated podcaster, all in one shot. By live streaming your show on OMTimes TV and broadcasting it across the extensive OMTimes radio and TV networks, you become more than a host. You become an ambassador and a force for positive change. OMTimes. Open yourself to the possibilities.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour. If we could find a way to get inside each other's minds. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes. Well, before you abuse, criticize, and accuse. Walk a mile in my shoes.
Welcome back. Mark Nepo, presence. It's one thing for us to understand that we need to be more present. We need to be more active in creating opportunities for ourselves to be present. How do we convey this, and how do we encourage this in our youth?
Well, first off, I don't know, but let me speak to it. And I don't, my wife and I don't have children, but I was a child, so I have some experience. But I think with children as well as with adults, I think it starts with honoring and inquiring into the truth of their experience. Because being present, this is being present, we kind of have a little bit of a cartoon nature of presence. That presence kind of implies, oh, that's good thing. Well, presence to pain, fear, confusion, this is all necessary presence, because it's through presence is the key to our authenticity, and our authenticity is the key to our kinship, to our relationship, to the fact that we're not alone, that we are part of a larger living web of connection. So it starts with inquiring, I think, into the truth of each person's experience. What is it like to be you? I had this is a very touching story. Came from one of my teaching circles, and I was teaching in Charleston at a wonderful place I've gone to for years, the Sophia Institute, and people were in small groups in dyads, and I had asked people to speak about one truth that was reliable to them. And there was a wonderful mother, and her son was maybe in his late 20s, and they were going through this together, which was very touching. And in the middle of the exercise, they stopped and came up to me and said, well, the mother said, I think we're at an impasse. I said, well, tell me what's happening. And she spoke, not Jack, who was the son, and said, well, I told Jack what I feel is truth and reliable, and then he said that he doesn't think anything is true. And so I think we're at an impasse. And so I said, well, I invited you to listen to each other. And so I invite you to go back. And I said, what would it be like, if your son moved to China, you would ask him, what's it like living in China? How's the weather? Why did you go there? Do you like living there? So I said, what would it be if you asked Jack, what's it like to live in the land where nothing is true? How did you come to go there? What's the food like? What are the people like? And interestingly, later on in this same group, there was another mother who had lost her son of a similar age in a car accident recently, and she was very tender and grieving. And at one point, she just burst into tears, and we took a break. And when we reassembled, Jack, this young man, was the first one to rush over to her and embrace her. And at the end of the retreat, when we were saying goodbye, I said to Jack, can I share something with you? He said, sure. And I put my hand on his chest and I said, whatever it was that made you reach out to that grieving mother, that is true.
What did he say?
Oh, he just smiled, an all-knowing smile, which was much older. It was a deep soul smile as to something deep, deep within him, older than all of us. And so I think that, it's so important to honor wherever, especially young people, where is it that you live? What is it that you know? What is it like to be you? How do you see the world? And from that conversation, to start to affirm the authenticity, the presence. Often a question that I ask of adults, but I think is very important for young people, is what is heartening and what is disheartening? What is life-giving and what is life-draining? Because often things feel complex, we get in our heads, and for me, it simplifies things. And I say, if what is before me, even if it's difficult, is life-giving and heartening, well, then I lean all in. But if what's before me is life-draining and disheartened, then what am I doing there? And so how do we, through the specificity of their own knowledge, how do we encourage our young people to move toward life?
That's really they're good questions there to ask, because so often when parents, and their youth are going at it, it really is about one being right and the other being wrong, and they can't get to that place where they can just stop and say, "Tell me what it's like for you. Tell me what it's like in your world."
Well, I think
because
one of the difficult things, and this is not just in our age, but again, it's more acute in our age because it's gone on forever, is especially with parents and children, but even among peers, is the sense that because I've gone through something, I know what it will be like for you. Just not true at all. And so whether it starts with experiencing love or pain, and then we make philosophies out of it, we make stances out of our experience, then we make political theories out of it, and now all of a sudden we have all these patterns that we're propping up rather than staying in the current of life. And so, when we're seeing this today worldwide, that, if I push away what is different, then all I look for is to confirm what I already know. And that's not education. Robert Keegan is a developmental psychologist at Harvard, and one of the things he said that I quote in one of my books is that he talked about centrism, whether it's egocentrism or national centrism or ethnocentrism, whatever it might be, really comes from when we mistake what is familiar as true. I think that's profound. Because just because it's familiar doesn't mean it's true. But when we do that, then anything that's new is false. And then we're doomed. Because how do we ever grow? How do we ever grow? As opposed to, thank God you are not me. Teach me something I don't know.
Good point. I want to talk to you about one particular segment of your book that really has stayed with me for many, many days, and I keep talking to people about it. And that is the old world is gone. I think the pandemic has given us an opportunity. It was going anyway, but the pandemic has underscored that. And, everybody since then is saying that, I want to get back to normal. I don't know what normal is. There is no normal. When will I find the new normal, etc. And you were very eloquent in the story that you told to illustrate that, because you said that, the whole pandemic spread brought back to you moments of your cancer journey.
Yes.
And I wonder whether you could just share with us,
Sure.
paraphrase for us what you shared in the book.
Yeah, and I think that I imagine that other people who've been through life-threatening things might have had an echo like this. I was surprised when the pandemic unfolded that it brought a lot of my cancer journey back. And then I started to down one particular moment that kept coming back to me. And during my journey, when I was first diagnosed, I had a tumor, a large tumor growing in my skull bone. And I finally went to a doctor, and that doctor then told me that I had cancer. It was a rare form of lymphoma, though that wasn't diagnosed for quite some time. But of course I was disoriented and afraid, and I thought he had the wrong folder. It couldn't be me. You must have made a mistake. And but when I left his office that day, the door I had come through to keep that appointment was gone. There was no way back to life before that moment. And I think that the pandemic has done this for humanity. The old world is gone. There is no way back. There is only loving each other forward. And you know what? It made me think more deeply about Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's passages of grief. And many people know they're not sequential, but there are these 5 moods or stages she identifies that we bounce around in grief. And one is denial, one is anger, one is bartering, one is depression, and one is acceptance. And I started to feel that we have whole parts of our society and globally that are stuck in these passages. We've seen it. People stuck in denial. There's no pandemic. It's a hoax. There's no virus. Meanwhile, millions of people are dying. And we have people who are stuck in anger. You're not going to tell me to wear a mask. And what are we protesting? Biology? Gravity? So when I could start to see it that way, it opened me more deeply to compassion. How do we get people unstuck? And this goes back to what we were saying about children. How do we ask and inquire into the truth of our experience so that we can move through it? Rilke, the great Austrian poet, he had, and I know his work so well, but I recently came across a saying that I didn't know of his. He said, "Let everything happen, beauty and terror. No one feeling is final. Keep going. Keep going." And so there is this amazing paradox about the life of feelings. Feelings are how we know spirit. They're essential at how we know each other. But the paradox is we are not our feelings. So to understand this, all we have to do is look at a tree in the wind. A tree is never more alive than when the wind lifts it. But the tree is not the wind. The tree is not the wind. And so how do we let the feelings through? How do we keep going? No one feeling is final. So I also believe that, in the Jewish tradition, the word Sabbath literally means the one day we don't turn one thing into another. And the pandemic has forced humanity into a global Sabbath. We can't turn away. We can't go back. We can't scheme, dream, turn things into magic or more technology. We had to stop. And through our discomfort, rediscover the miracle of what is. That what is here is more than enough. So I think that, there's so much talk of needing to repair the world, which is true. But the first step to repairing the world is to inhabit it. To inhabit it, ourselves, each other, and to bring life alive where it is, right here.
Yeah. One of the things that I really like and admire about your books is the little contemplations you give, the things to walk with, the little things that prod my mind into stopping and really thinking about something. I mean, really stopping and being present with whatever it is, you've given me to think about. And, this is where we have our perception shifted, isn't it? Because when we can stop for that moment and really look at something, we open up a space for new thoughts to come in about it. What are some of your favorite contemplations, for want of a better word, that you've offered in this book?
Well, I think that, and I love them, and I think I started. It may have been way back with 7,000 Ways to Listen, to start incorporating these questions, these journal questions and dialogue questions, conversation questions, because the life of teaching and learning was seamlessly moving into the life of inquiry, which was retrieving and writing the books. And so I think what I love so much about asking questions, so I'm not sure that I can pick one, but what I love so much is there are invitations to personalize what we're talking about. And I've come to believe that the only things that remain abstract are things that are not personalized. And I've understood about myself over time that it's the poet in me that sees, it's the philosopher in me that tries to understand what I've seen, but it's the cancer survivor in me that asks the questions. How do we make use of it? What tool or can we form this way? Where does it live in your life? So there's never a how. I can't give how to. I can simply pose the questions. What does it look like for you? What does it, how does that live in you? How can you take that and practice it? At the grocery store, at the gas station, in the driveway.
Do you think that if you hadn't had cancer, if you hadn't had that door closing so loudly, that you would have followed the path that you've taken? That you wouldn't, maybe not have gone as deep as you have in contemplating everything?
Well, I think it's hard to know, but probably not as nakedly or cleanly and as widely or deeply. And I think one of the great, the two great gifts from almost dying for me, well, three. One is that my head dropped into my heart. And ever since then, my mind has served my heart and not the other way around. And the second thing is that I became a student of all paths. I was raised Jewish. I have a great tie to the Jewish tradition and heritage. But I was blessed to have people from all walks of life, all traditions, very widely and openly, including atheists and scientists and every you could think of, offer me some kind of gift or blessing. And so I was not, and all these years later, am still not wise enough to know what worked and what didn't. And I think that I was asked, challenged to believe in everything. And so all my work, all my teaching, all my books try to affirm the central, unnameable spirit at the center of all traditions, the unique gifts of each. And again, through those questions, where does it live? Where does it live in our lives? And I think the third thing for me was that I'm here by a miracle. And the trace of that is that I was given the lens of the miraculous, that is to see, and goes back to presence, because what I've learned is that and for anyone, but if I can be present enough, the extraordinary lives hiding in the open, in the ordinary. Everything is extraordinary if my heart is open enough and I'm present enough. So again, I don't have to go somewhere to find something special. I need to inhabit life fully enough to reveal what's special where I am.
That's it, isn't it? Right here, right now, in this moment.
Now, one of the great kind of humble paradox is with all my teaching, I literally go all over the world. And wherever I go, when I get there, I affirm that there's nowhere to go. And I'm happy to do it. Of course, we travel great distances on the surface, but whenever we're together authentically, we open the same eternal moment.
Yes. Yeah. Mm. So you write in Surviving Storms about the remaking of humanity, and a large proportion of the book describes the practices and resources that you say we can reacquaint ourselves with in order to restore our basic human nature and transform our perceived differences. Can you share a few of those practices and resources with us?
Well, I think that we've touched on some of them. I think the one is to reclaim and re-inhabit how rare it is to be here. Because that cleans our eyes, our ears, and our heart and our mind. And then when we see more clearly, we make different decisions. So another is to act on the web of connection and kinship. That's one of the things we have to resist. We by the nature of all the progress and all the technology, it makes us into watchers. We're not watching. When I see you fall down on the street, it's not TV. I am an active agent. I can help you up. So how do we act on relationship? How do we, and I think very important is to stay in the life of questions. Because questions, certainly in the outer world, questions have answers. What time were we going to be talking today, and how did we turn on the technology? But inwardly, and in the world of meaning, the questions don't have answers. We ask questions, open relationships. So how do we stay? We ask a question the way we'd open a door we'd like to walk through with another. So I think one of the things that's just a very specific practice that I do that I try to help myself stay in the life of questions is when I feel strongly about something, before I voice it to anyone else, I turn it into a question. And I see where that leads my heart. And so I think, this was a great, I learned from the book More Together Than Alone. This is a great tradition from the Native American tradition. Elder councils, which still meet today. They always meet in circle, not just for equity, because there's no head to a circle, but so that everyone has a direct view of the center. And I love that, because the assumption is no one view is enough.
Yeah.
If we are going to understand whatever we put in the center, we need everyone's view. And so the life of questions leads us to gathering meaning, not choosing it. I need your view and my view, and that will point up a larger, that we're more together than alone.
Yeah, yeah. Well, many people that I know ask, where are we heading next? How do we move into this new place that's unfolding? And I think you're absolutely right. The answer to give them is keep asking questions because that's what will get you there. Yeah. What are you, we've only got a few seconds left. What are you doing right now? You must be ready to go on tour with this new book. You must have some new events.
Yes, I'll be teaching as we come forward. In August, I'm giving a webinar on the deeper teachers that come out of the pandemic: fear, pain, and grief. And people can find out about that at live.marknepo.com. And people can see where I am teaching again in person. So I will be out at different places, and people can also find that at my website, marknepo.com. So it's a joy to be with you again. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're so welcome. Just before we close, one final thing. If people only take one thing away from this book, what would you want it to be?
That we are the world as it forms, and not to be afraid to live in their heart and be that one gesture that keeps life going.
Well said. Mark Nepo, thank you for joining us today.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thank you.
Surviving Storms, Finding the Strength to Meet Adversity, is published by St. Martin's Essentials. And for more information about Mark Nepo, his books, courses, webinars and retreats, visit live.marknepo.com, 3intentions.com and marknepo.com. I'm Sandie Sedgbeer. I'll be back with another edition of What is Going On at the same time next week. Till then, it's goodbye from me.